Hey everybody, what's up? It's your friend Chase. Welcome to another episode of the Chase Jarvis Live Show here on Creative Live. You all know this show. This is where I sit down with amazing humans and I do everything I can to unpack their beautiful brains to help you live your dreams, whether that's in career, in hobby, or in life. My guest today is an artist. He's an activist, super long-time friend of mine, very successful restaurateur. And today we're going to talk about his new book, which is going to be a very powerful one because you need to prepare yourself for this. Let's talk about death over dinner. Michael Hebb in the house. We love you.
What's up, buddy?
Yes.
Yes.
So we've had thousands of conversations on couches all over the world at various times of day and night. And
I wonder how many continents we've been on together. It's a few. Yeah.
Many. And so I think this is going to be a special discussion. I feel like I think about the show as being special because I prepare for it. I feel like we have amazing guests. But the fact that you and I have the history that we have, hopefully we can go from 0 to 100 miles an hour for the listener with basically zero effort. So your background, we were talking about, one of my favorite things is that people on this show they span a crazy array of backgrounds. That basically everybody I try and introduce is some sort of a hyphen. No one's just like volleyball star. That's like not a thing. It's like hyphen. And there are many things that we could say about your background. We chose to say artist, activist, and now about to be New York Times best-selling author.
Sure. Let's put that under the universe.
We know one another originally from events around food and culture. Mm-hmm. And so in your own words, give me a little bit of the arc of how you got here, your backstory, and how we're sitting here on this couch. Well, we're not on a couch, actually. We're in two chairs.
Yeah.
Just like frame for us, because you can be so many things, and you are a chameleon and multi-talented, multifaceted artist. But so just tell us a little bit of story about how you got here, and we'll form our own opinions.
Yeah, that sounds great. Well, I mean, kind of similar to you, it started in a field that doesn't look like the field that you're in now. You started in philosophy.
Yeah.
Right? And then ended up with a camera in your hand. My background is in classics and architecture. Right? That's what I studied. And then when I was 21, I opened an architecture firm. Left architecture school and opened an architecture firm in Portland with star architect Mark Lakeman. And then we also started this nonprofit kind of guerrilla architecture initiative, or I guess not even kind of, very much guerrilla architecture initiative called City Repair, which was, we created City Repair with the idea that we wanted to, without invitation or permission, fix the city in the ways that we saw fit. So looking at like this architecture mindset of design. So really from foundational design, like what is the world that I want to live in? What is the distance between the world that I'm living in and the world that I want to live in, right? Okay, what's that chasm, and then how do I cross that adaptive valley, like that scary place, personally?
Yep.
Right?
And as a city, right? You're making culture in that.
Yeah, like Portland, and this was before Portland was Portlandia, before Portland was weird, before Portland was like any of those.
It was just a northwest logging town.
Yeah, it was a shithole,
yeah.
Right? You know what I mean? I mean, sorry, but Portland and Seattle were ugly kind of backwaters, in a lot of ways.
20 years ago,
Yeah, and so, which gives you a great deal of opportunity, right? Because there was nothing going on, and there was no eyes on us. And so Mark and I started doing things like turning whole neighborhood intersections into piazzas, into Italian piazzas, by painting like 500-foot Anasazi symbols of life across the whole intersection, right? Without getting permission from the city. So the city woke up one day and all of a sudden an intersection in Selwood was turned into this huge painting, this mural on the street, on the asphalt, and we'd ripped up the corners and put in 24-hour tea stations and clubhouses for the kids. And all of these things, but with consensus from the neighbors.
But not the city.
But not the city. Yeah, we forgot to invite them to the party. And so they got really pissed off, right? What in the fuck is this? And who do we put in handcuffs, kind of thing? And who's going to pay for this? And the mayor at the time, Mayor Vera Katz, was like, hold everything. You idiots. They've actually done all of the things I've asked you to do with your community engagement projects. They've created consensus. They've created local networks. They've created art and culture, and they're probably going to need less services from the city. They become less expensive by breaking our laws. And you want to find them? Like, this is what I've asked you to, so there's this incredible upheaval. And we ended up getting a 1-year temporary permit to run this project, and now there's 15,000 of them around the world. So a couple things I learned from that was civil disobedience is essential and fun and scary. Transgression is very important, but you better know what the fuck you're doing, right? Like, if you're going to break the law, have a very good design, have it really well thought out, know your history. And so I think that what I learned from that was, these lessons, but also that I can have a major impact, right? And I can create models that go way beyond the one instance. Right?
Of a thing, yep.
Yeah, and we've talked about this
for
years. How do you, instead of just creating art or culture, how do you enable others to create art and culture, which I think is, at the core of Creative Live. It's the core of the work. And so that became an essential part of my work early on. And I also realized that architecture and even nonprofits and initiatives are very expensive, both resources and the amount of people and relationships that you have to manage to build a building, right? So that
it's a big project.
It's a huge project. You know this. You've built out a couple.
Yeah.
So you build a building in order to have a human experience, right? Like, that's what the architect does, And it's like this amazingly esteemed thing. Like, you're shaping human experience, the engine, the machine for living, like in Corbusier sort of idea. And as a young man, I was very into that kind of hierarchical relationship of being the designer of experience, right? And then I realized the table is already designed. It's maybe the first architecture, right? And we don't know how to use it anymore.
It was a dirt floor, and then it was a rock. And
And then it was a fire where you roasted something, and you didn't want to burn your fingers when you went to eat the meat that you'd killed, and so you put a table at the same level, essentially, of where it was roasting, just kind of moved it over, and then this other thing happened of concentrating calories. It's pretty extraordinary. We talk about what made us human, and we think about this evolutionary leap, and it has now been proven that Darwin was wrong, and we made the evolutionary leap because we cooked. And so apes have these incredible jaws, like big jaws, small brains, huge bellies, right? And they chew 7 hours a day. And humans chew 24 minutes a day.
Wow.
And so when you go from 7 hours of doing an activity to 24 minutes, we lost the jaw size, right? And we had all of this room in our head.
Let's fill it with the brain.
Well, yeah, exactly. And the stove became the belly. Because we had this belly like a big cow's belly almost that could deal with nuts and berries and roots to a belly that can actually is streamlined because we cook, right? And so we got big brains. We're sitting across from each other around tables, eating, and then language happens, right? So I was like,
Tables way easier.
Yeah,
Tables way easier than a building.
It's way easier than a building.
Don't have to build it.
And you lose yourself in it. Like, it doesn't matter. If you think about the most memorable meals you've ever had, it's not at Lutèce or Noma, the French Laundry, like a respect for what those guys create. But that's never somebody's most memorable meal. Like, it's never at a palace. It's always someplace where it's the people and the experience, and some like calamity happened or something, but it still was a great dinner. And what I learned from that was you could create human experience anywhere. You could create the architecture of experience without the budget. So I was like, I'm going to spend the rest of my life working on tables. So
And by working on them, not building them, but building the human experience around them.
yeah, but we've built some tables.
We have.
Yeah.
We have, like, literally built tables to do some of the events we've done together.
Yeah. So
So you traversed the landscape from architecture to food. I'm going to fill in a couple of blanks
Yeah,
here
of
so that
course.
you don't
Go
have to
for
do
it.
it yourself. Restaurateur in Portland did some really early interesting, like the concept, it was before the concept of farm to table, and you were buying stuff from the people who were growing the food
Yep.
in and outside of Portland, getting that kind of food at the table and building culture there for the, at this time, Portland's music scene was starting to shape up and
Yeah.
and combining culture with food in an establishment. And as you said right before we went live, I said something about, you talked about you as an entrepreneur, and you said, no, endeavors as an entrepreneur you need to make money.
yeah, no, I'm a terrible business person. Yeah.
So you weren't long for the world of building restaurants, mostly because they didn't suit what I have come to know as your sort of vision and mission for your life. But convening people at a table was still core to that.
Yeah.
So talk about shaping the underground food movement of like dinners that were unsanctioned by the government and for
Yeah.
whom you were paid to bring people together, but there was no taxation, it was just guerrilla style, because you were the first person I knew doing that.
Yeah, I mean, when I left the architecture world, in the nonprofit world, I was like, wow, starting a nonprofit and dealing with all of these personalities was more than I knew. I didn't have the capacity for it when I was 22, 23. And my partner at the time, Naomi Pomeroy, who's gone on to be a renowned chef and James Beard winner, et cetera.
Yeah.
She
all
was
the chef shows.
Yeah, she's on MasterChef, et cetera. We have a beautiful daughter together. She's an amazing talent. But at the time, she didn't know what she wanted to do, was a very talented cook, and so we started a private chef company for her, and I knew a bunch of like the glitterati and people who could pay for private chef services in Portland, and then we started getting catering requests, but we didn't have a licensed kitchen. And I was like, well, that's fine. We'll cater for Wyden and Kennedy's annual party, a holiday party, or for the mayor, or for Nike's, executive team out of our bungalow kitchen
Right.
in Portland using Weber grills because we couldn't keep up with the thousands of people we were cooking for, totally illegally. But it was a service industry. We were providing a service, and that started to weigh on me. And I was like, this isn't generative. This is a nice idea, but how do we flip this? And what I realized was at that time that the restaurant world and the food world in general didn't have an underground, right? There was not the garage bands, there was not grunge, there was not the Warhols, the Basquiat's, every great art form has an underground.
Yeah.
Right? A place where you can fuck up, essentially where you can fail without high cost, right? And in culinary world, it was
and take huge risks.
Huge risks.
Potentially successful ones, but yeah, you're lacking the consequences generally.
Yeah, and so there was this huge missing, again, this adaptive valley or chasm, right? You would go to culinary school or you'd work for Wolfgang Puck, and then you'd go and find $1 million because you had that much charm or talent or whatever, and then you open a restaurant and then you're Mario Batali or something like that, and then you're gone because you're an asshole. But that trajectory for me just wasn't that exciting. I felt like there was a whole missing potency in the culinary world, and so I was like, let's create a culinary underground. How would we do that? Well, let's create dinners in our living room. Let's create this idea called Popup restaurants or underground suppers. It didn't really exist.
Yeah,
I mean,
for sure.
Yeah, I mean, there's been ad hoc dinners throughout time.
Yeah.
But I was also very inspired by the paladores in Cuba, where people because they didn't have the money to feed their families, were turning their living rooms into restaurants and risking being put in jail slash who knows what at that point in Cuba. And I was like, well, this is going to be lower risk, but let's turn our living room into a restaurant. And so we started a thing called Family Supper. And within 6 months of doing these dinners where people would come and leave money in a jar, and it was illegal, and we didn't have any of the licenses from food handlers. You name
Nothing.
it, we didn't have
nothing.
it. Yeah.
You name it, we had it. No, it was you name it, we didn't have it.
Yeah, totally. We were breaking it till we made it, kind of thing, breaking every law. Within 6 months of doing these dinners in our living room, we were on the front page of the dining section of the New York Times of starting a whole new, movement and trend, which they didn't really have. They call us and they're like, "Who else is doing this?" So we could say it's a trend. I was like, we don't know. We don't know of anybody else, right? And New York Times wants to break every trend, or used to. I don't know what they want to do anymore, but. It was two things that kind of smelled like us in an article, on the fringe and thriving, and then all of a sudden we became the poster children of this idea, which for me, even though the press was seductive for a while, the real interesting thing for me was to get the idea out that you can use whatever you have. Anybody can use, whatever surrounding them, whatever apartment, whatever warehouse, whatever vacant lot they have available to them, and they can create an experience where they try out their craft, both as a chef, right? Because the big part of this was the culinary, but also just as a person who's interested in phenomenology or experience design, right? Because that's what a successful restaurant or a successful culinary experience is as much about the experience as it is about the food.
For sure.
And we saw it take off, and now there's pop-up restaurants everywhere,
right.
And occasionally I'll go into one, and they're like, "Wait, it's you." Like,
it's
I
you.
was like, "Oh shit,
it's you undergrounder."
Yeah. So that was an interesting chapter, and then it turned into a restaurant group / art incubator, and that was exciting to see Portland, as Portland had all of the components, but it hadn't. It was like a gaseous state before the universe that is the now Portland that we know had formed. And, we would have Miranda July and the Decemberists and Modest Mouse and Gus Van Sant and, and then like a bunch of experimental artists you've never heard of, all like in our establishments constantly, and incredible writers. And Gore Vidal came. And like, so all of these people were intersecting in our kind of public eateries, but it wasn't sustainable, and it blew up in an extraordinary fashion. But
fiery.
Yeah, but I learned a lot from that.
Yeah.
And
so you said something in there which I think is really, I want to put a pin in it, and that is that anyone can do whatever their craft is with whatever they have with them.
Yes.
And I think that's a very, very important, and that you know the audience super well. You're very familiar with Creative Live. I've been a partner and a friend and a co-conspirator in this thing we've been building for a long time. But that's, I think, a huge important takeaway, that your first things were you just built what you had with what you had.
Yeah.
Or what you didn't have with what you had. And to me, that is a barrier for so many people. I can't do this because I don't have X, Y, Z, the things I see on TV. In that world, you would have been, it was a commercial kitchen, and it would have been all this, $500,000 worth of things. You're like, do I have heat?
Yeah.
Do I have a table? Yeah. And do I have a small group of people that I might be able to put around this table and try my craft?
Yeah, I mean, I always say let's start by starting. The most terrifying thing in any project, in any discipline, is the white page, right? Like, it is, talk about an oppressive idea, right? Or an oppressive phenomenon, is the blank page, right? Put something on it, right? Put the worst shit on it, just put something on that page. Do something, start by starting, has always been my mentality.
It's a super powerful concept, I think, for any discipline. ironically, we're about to talk about your book.
Yeah, talk about a white page.
Speaking,
Start as a white page.
speaking of white pages, so I think that was a great narrative to introduce the idea of getting people together for a cultural experience. In that case, around food. And I had for what it's worth, a little backstory about us. A funny story about I will tell the story of our first meeting.
Yeah, please.
Which it was shortly after your fiery end to your restaurateurism. You moved to Seattle, and we knew someone in the press who was fond of both of our works separately. Mm-hmm. His name is Nathan. Nathan, if you're listening, thank you.
Hembley.
Yep. And he's like, I don't remember, he was at my photo studio once, and he's like, do you know Michael? And I was like, I know the name. That was a guy from Portland. Oh, yeah, cool. It's like, you guys have to get together. You have to. And I was like, okay, cool. I'd love to meet how many times does someone say, you got to meet my buddy? It's like 1,000 times that you've heard that in your life. And so I didn't think much of it. And then we would every, few weeks or month, I'd see Nathan just around the city and say, no, I'm going to do this. And I remember getting a call, and like 11 o'clock on a Tuesday or something. And it was like, remember Michael Hebb? I was like, yeah. He's like, I'm going to pick him up. I'm going to get lunch, and I'm bringing lunch and Michael to your studio. Yeah. And I'm going to put you two guys together. And 45 minutes, this lovely gentleman I've never met before, and my other friend Nathan, and Paseo sandwiches.
Yeah, and when Nathan took off.
And he left.
Yeah.
He just put the food in the middle of the table at my then photo studio, and drove away. And we're like, cool, I guess. And I'm going to improvise here because I don't remember exactly what we talked about, but it was a very engaging conversation. And by the time we parted ways on our first mandate, we had a project we were going to do together.
Yep.
And that was getting amazing musicians together, combining them with dinners.
Great chefs.
Yeah, great chefs, award-winning chefs from Seattle and other places, and do a series of dinners called Songs for Eating and Drinking. And we did that. Yeah. And it was wildly successful.
Yeah.
People still talk about those dinners, and I have a feature film in mind.
Yep.
That we
still need to.
We need to sew that together. But at the core of that was my background in making photos, media, helping create ideas that spread. Yep. Your background of creating culture, conversation around a table, mash that shit together, and we've got something. Yeah. And I think why I chose to go into that story now is because that is making something where there was nothing. Yeah. It wasn't just like, oh, cool, let's be friends and talk for the next 5 years and plan the thing we're going to do. It's like, hey, you serious? Yeah, I'm serious. Cool, let's do some serious shit together. Yep. But just start. And then I think it was probably 4 weeks later, we had our first dinner.
We had our first dinner. And we had people, Stone Gossard from Pearl Jam and Fences. And
it was
all of these incredible people.
Yeah, and we went on to do many of those. So starting is incredible. Yeah. And it's the most valuable thing you can do. So now I'm going to pivot back to that blank page. Yeah. Because getting people together around over food or convening them, and you've just kicked this book off. I think we're your first interview, your first piece of press before you just came from something. Your second piece of press around your new book called Let's Talk About Death. Yeah. And then the over dinner is a little bit of an homage to your past. Yeah. But I'm going to just say what it is. It's like, let's talk about death is not the thing that you want to, hey, you want to come over to my house and we're going to talk about death. So, but we also talked before we started rolling cameras that it's not really about death. It's about death, but it's really about life. So, A, congratulations on the book. B, you started having dinners and talking about death long before anybody. I knew I was willing to have that conversation in public. Tell me about the blank page and tell me, why do people care about having a conversation around death? Yeah, well, for so many reasons. But let me give you the kind of how we got to this book quickly, because it's kind of a leap from, Portland dinners with Gore Vidal and, Yeah, Modest Mouse. So,
I spent about 10 years after Portland really kind of understanding how the dinner table and small other salons and other small gatherings of humans and major stakeholders could change national and even international conversations about really important topics, right? So we know how the media works to try to shift or shape conversations, and then there are those smoky back rooms, right? Like where a lot of the chess pieces are actually moved. And so I got lucky to be invited into a lot of those smoky back rooms to talk about to talk about death, to talk about gender inequity, to talk about pay or
Pay gap.
pay gaps, to talk about homelessness, to talk about even so far as bringing presidents together, President Kagame from Rwanda and former President Mary Robinson from Ireland together to talk about ending genocide. They'd both dealt with genocide, and the Clinton Foundation asked me to bring them together and provoke them into conversation. So I had taken this idea of the table as a cultural site, as a place that, I was like, people need to learn how to just eat together again and have it be fun and not just, entertainment, but actually be really engaging, participatory. So that was the first stage, and then it was like, how do we go even deeper, right? How do we make this a place where lives other than the people that are at the table are impacted for the positive, right?
Yeah.
And so I went into the hardest conversations I could possibly think of and was willing to moderate and create those experiences, which was phenomenal. Like
you did it for all sorts of different foundations. Like you mentioned the Clinton Foundation.
Obama's, like you name it, like crazy shit, but I could do that forever, but the thing is, like, I can't invite you to those dinners, right? There's only so many people at those tables. I can't share it. I can write about it, and you can, look in from behind.
Record it.
And that's
recorded lots of dinners. But.
Yeah, and that's kind of cool, but I was like, how do I actually share this profound experience of deep human connection, deep self-knowledge at the table with millions of people? Like, how does it scale? Mm-hmm. How does the thing that can't scale, the very finite dinner table, how does it scale, right? And so I was like, I need a topic that I can build almost like a board game. Like, how do I gamify dinner, right? Like, we play board games after dinner around, sometimes completely inane things, but we get to know each other better. Like, how do I make a very deeply meaningful experience over dinner and have 1 million people have that experience, right? And so I was looking around for a topic, and then I came across death, like stumbled.
Showstopper.
Showstopper.
Quite literally. Bump, bump.
We're here all week. So the thing that it was this perfect storm, right? That I walked into, and sometimes this as an artist and creator, you have those moments where you have one conversation and everything changes for you, right? And I had that conversation on a train with a couple of physicians, and they didn't know each other, and I didn't know them, and they had left our current medical system, which we all know is broken, right? And they'd both left it because they were just so frustrated with our current medical system, and I was like, well, what's the most broken thing? If it's so broken, what's the most broken thing? And they both said how we die, right? Two people that don't know each other, don't know me, and I'm like, this is 6 years ago. How we die, the good death, conscious dying, hospice, palliative care, all of these catchphrases that are now front page everywhere all of the time, were nowhere in the landscape, right? And so for me it was, and I said, what do you mean how we die is broken? Like, you die, like how can that be broken, right? Yeah. And they said, well, there's one statistic that really illuminates this, and it's that 75% of people want to die at home, and only 25% of us do. So in the United States, a country that prides itself on the rugged individualism, on agentic lives, on making our own decisions, half of us are not getting what we want for one of the most critical parts of our lives or our loved ones' lives is their passing, right? Why are we dying in hospitals when we don't want to? And it was, so for me, it was like, wait a second, and the answer to that is, right, we're not getting the death we want for ourselves or our loved ones because we're not talking about it. Full stop. Like, nothing else is wrong other than the fact that we don't talk about death, right? And so when you don't talk about death and you don't know what your loved ones want and you don't know how to honor them, the default from the medical field is very expensive. They'll throw everything at keeping you alive, right? And it prolongs your grief if you haven't figured out how to honor your parents, your spouse. Like, you want to know what they want because it's very hard to grieve somebody and to complete the grieving if you haven't figured out how to honor them. And so I was like, holy shit, like we have this financial crisis because it's bankrupting
people.
Yeah, it's the number one cause of bankruptcy in the U.S. is end-of-life expenses.
Wow.
Number one, right?
Not number 10 or 11 or 62.
Yep.
One.
Yeah, biggest expense in their broken medical system, right? Is the last, is the end of life, right? I was like, okay, so we have a financial crisis around this. We have an emotional crisis. We have a communication crisis, and we have an opportunity to treat repression. Repression and shame around a topic. And one of the things that I've learned through having difficult conversations is repression leads to disease, right? And that's not just I'm not Gandalf. I haven't been alive long enough to see,
I'm not Gandalf. That's the tweet from this. I'm not Gandalf. Michael Hebb, quote, I'm not Gandalf.
I haven't been able to see, your repressive aunt die of X because of the fact that she won't talk about money, sex, death, drugs, or whatever it is. But luckily, it's been clinically proven that repressive styles create metabolic disorders and create autoimmune disorders. So we're talking about cancers. We're talking about all of these things have a direct relationship to how
shame, suffering, grieving,
how
loss.
we talk, repression. So I was like, wait, death is a doorway. This conversation, the most taboo shit in our culture that loves to talk about everything, right?
Yes, so we think.
Yeah.
Or so we've branded it that we love to talk about everything, but we really don't.
Yeah, millennials share everything. They share about their, the poop they had in the morning or the blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, but they won't talk about death. So let's look at the thing that we repress most. Let's put that into a box, a conversation over dinner, and let's scale it. And people are like, "You're crazy," right? And then I call it Matt Wiggins. We have a friend who's a leader in the healthcare space, and I was like, "I'm gonna create this thing called Let's Have Dinner and Talk About Death," and he's like, "You're crazy. It's not gonna work, but I'm totally in."
And that's how we roll. That's our little posse. It's never gonna work, but let's try it anyway.
Let's try it anyway. And lo and behold, so we created this thing, deathoverdinner.org. It's a basic toolkit for how to have a dinner, talk about death, whether you yourself or someone you love is terminal, whether you're grieving somebody, whether you just want to be prepared, whether you're a doctor or a nurse or somebody who's been close to a traumatic death, and give them individualized scripts based upon why they might want to have that conversation. We built it for $11,000. We put no money behind it for 5 years. 5 years since its launch, there's been over 1 million people who've sat down and had this dinner in 30 countries, right? So it worked. So
the punchline is it worked.
It worked. So again, this idea of like, what's a project that you can do for very little resource, right? That's incredibly disruptive and transgressive, right? But very beautifully designed, because we put aesthetics at the highest level with any of these projects. It's always been very important to me. Beauty creates change. And then to have it reach millions of people, make their lives better, reduce that gap between the world that I live in, the world that I want to live in. Of course, there's people like Trump and some other players that push this gap out for me. It's like, come on, we're making some headway. But there's always that. So that was the setting for for the book.
Yeah, there was a physical event that you were able to scale to create a platform. I'll call it like a physical platform. I think I like that word because it simplifies the concept. And then, of course, you're able to write the book. There's a bunch of people who came to you and said, this is a perfect topic for a book. It obviously needs to happen. But talk to me for a second about, you said in that description that for those folks at home, yes, we're talking about death and it's an important topic, and yet it's really a conversation about life.
Yeah.
Right? Because it just sells less books. Let's talk about life.
Yeah, right. Well, even like, let's have dinner and talk about life, or life over dinner.
Yeah. Said no one.
Yeah,
it's
like never covered by
it's
editorial.
Yeah, no one writes that in the New York Times.
No.
But what it really is it's facing our mortality, that's one of the reasons it was really important for me to have you on the show, B, get this conversation out into the tribe that we've built here at Creative Live, because as creators and entrepreneurs who are passionate and curious about building something, I think there's a lesson to be building things that are of value to you, that you've personally have experienced or have caused pain that you need to work through. And I think helping one another have the conversation about life. Are we living the life we want, and how do we manage and contribute and heal and all of the remedy, the sort of like pre-remedy the things that are going to go wrong if we don't live the life that we want.
Yeah.
Disease, if you will. It's like preventative disease by living our best lives. So give me some context there.
Well, especially since we're talking primarily to creatives, right? The conversation we can talk about death medically, we can talk about it philosophically, but let's talk about it in the creative process. I want to give people access to the kind of lexicon of death. Like, instead of it just being this room you don't go into, right? Or if only the brave go into, let's open it up and see what's in there, right? Let's unpack this thing. And when I think about it from death as a transformative idea, death as a transformative phenomenon, and the creative process, if you think about nature, right? Nature is arguably the greatest creator. I mean, not even arguably. Let's just go.
Boom.
Greatest creator, right?
Yep.
Like,
we got things like mountains. We got volcanoes.
Like us.
Things fly.
Yeah,
Humans.
Like a few things. And so, ostensibly, responsible for everything that we know of, including our thoughts, like Mother Nature. Boom, greatest creator. So if we look at nature, like, and even the most simple, we can get really into some very sophisticated nature metaphors, but let's just look at
basic.
Spring, summer, fall, winter, right? Okay. So winter has to happen. Everything has to die for spring to happen, right? Like that it's just, if you imagine summer, fall, spring, summer, fall, spring, we're all going to become compost, right? Because like literally,
there's too many things on the
Too
planet.
many things. Talk about, it's like the internet's kind of like that, right? We don't know how to kill shit on the internet. We don't know how to winter the internet.
Yeah.
And so we have this accumulation and we get lost in things. But nature shows us that death is an opportunity to, and so it's, for me when I'm talking to creatives, it's what in you needs to die for the thing that you're meant to be doing to show up, right? So there is something standing in between you and the work that you want to create, unless you're living it.
Yeah, if you're living your best self right now, kudos. But most of us aren't. Yeah.
Yeah, but the thing is, if you're living your best self, in 6 months you might not be, because something in you has to die in order to get to the next place, because we're dynamic, right? And people like you and I know that we have to shed constantly. We become really good at shedding skin. We get really good at not getting attached to our own ideas, our own egos about things, right? And there's so many ideas. How many ideas have you had that was like, that idea this isn't the right time, or I was just off, right?
Both.
You have to be like,
a lot, yeah.
And then I watch a lot of friends that are like, I can't break through, and they're carrying around all of these ideas that clearly are not about right now, or they're not the right person, and it's like, let that shit die, right? And it's, this goes to you can attach it to your relationships. Are you not happy in your relationship? Okay? Like, a lot of people aren't happy in their relationship because they think of marriage as not a death ritual, right? Like, here's the press release. Marriage is also is as much about a living ritual as it is a death ritual, okay? A new person is born, a new union is born when you get married. You know who dies? The single you, right? The single you is dead when you put that ring on your finger, and if it's not, your marriage is going to be dead, right? Like, there's no question about it, right? So it's like when you start to, instead of avoiding death as this like scary thing or trying to be, we fetishize it like with our horror film industry. We want to be like, electrocuted by it and through fear, which just shows that our curiosity, but it's such an unhealthy relationship. If we just turn and look at it, we see these opportunities to utilize it as a transformational, methodology. And so, for me, it's not spooky at all.
Yeah.
And to get to your point, the book's not about death. The dinners aren't about death. We don't know anything about death, right?
There are no death experts.
There are no experts in death. There are no death experts, right?
So let me tell you about death.
Yeah, like,
Or
you're lying.
Right.
Yeah.
Medically, people who've observed it, there's a lot of data on it, but that's also not what death is, right? That's an observance of it, and also the medical exposition of it is woefully inadequate.
Yeah.
So what lens have you put on it in the book to help us capture it?
Yeah, well, essentially, and you're right, we have medicalized death, and it's a community act. It's a human act. It's not a medical act. The thing, we have raised the idea of, like with Atul Gawande and Breath Becomes Air, and incredible amount of people, starting with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and actually going way forward, and all of the mystics throughout time, and all of the philosophers have been talking about death, right? Philosophy is born out of mortality, but there's a lot of people right now who've done a great job of showing us that our system is broken, or showing us that we need to really consider, our end in a very thoughtful way, and that there's an alternative. But what I felt like was missing is very practical, engaging, narrative, story-based tool. A tool like a. I don't want to say it's a guide, but the book itself is really meant to be this invitation to go into these dark canyons with me, to say, like, let's talk about every different types of death there are, let's talk about the scary ones like suicide. Let's talk about the fact that your parents are probably going to die before you hope in some ways, and the fact that it's difficult to talk to the people in your life about them. Let's just like put that on there. I'm not saying, even though death is all this great topic that's going to change your life and make you, more attractive and have better sex and all of these things, which it will. And we can talk. There's actually a study done at Harvard that meditating on death makes you funnier and it makes you laugh more, right? Like, so it's like, it has all of these, like...
There's so many upsides to death.
There's so many upsides to death. I feel like now we're on
now.
Late night TV, right? And, well, luckily you don't have anything. You've got one coming to you. And I'm not going to sell it to you. But where were we going?
We were going that there is a medical study. Makes you whether you're getting this is sexier, better looking, more exciting to have the conversations that other people aren't willing to have. Yeah,
so we need help in that because we've forgotten. It's like we've forgotten how to cook, and we've forgotten how to pickle, and we've forgotten how to make Sunday gravy that your grandma used to make. We've also forgotten how to broach the topic. Like, I kind of think about it like sex. If we treated death like sex, the conversation of death like getting laid, right? So you go to your parents, or you go to your spouse, whatever. Since it's about sex, let's make it your spouse. And you're like, hey, honey, I think we should talk about do our wills or something like that. And she's like, no thanks, right? And you'd be like, oh, okay. She doesn't want to talk about it. You come to me and you say, I tried to talk to my wife. She doesn't want to talk about it. Full stop. And I said, well, have you ever wanted to make love to your wife and have her not be interested? Yes. Okay. Then did you stop trying to make love to your life forever,
Right.
Or like when
is it
you
just
were
a not
courting,
now, or is not now, not forever? Or not
yeah,
now?
yeah, exactly. So if we treated it like courtship or getting laid, obviously respectfully and consensually, in all cases, and with death, and consensuality is actually key. Like you never force anybody into a conversation about death, and you never surprise them, right? So, and again, it's like sex, 100% consensual, 100% communicative, but you do not be like, hey, pizza night, we're having a death dinner. Like,
Recipe for disaster.
totally, it's not cool.
Yeah.
But treat it like courtship because we want to know these things. And to your point that the book's not about death, there are no experts in death, no one can tell me what's on the other side. If you have a near-death experience, that's awesome, and maybe you saw something but we don't know. And I honor anybody who's had a near-death experience, and there's wisdom to be gleaned, we just don't know exactly what it is. But the thing about this book, about the dinners, about any conversation, I don't care if you use my tools or anybody's tools or any inspiration, what's actually at play are two things, and that's human connection and knowing yourself, right? So when we talk about really any vulnerable topic, but especially death, death has the benefit of not having a lot of like interpersonal drama. Like we all face it. There's no hierarchy, and there's no experts. So, but when we face death, we learn. It's the quickest way to learn about yourself, to learn about your priorities. Like, what do I want at the end? Okay, and then what do I want between now and the end? Right, like
And when you talk about like the undercurrent that this show is largely based on, that creative life exists. My mission and vision for not only are we creating art and experience and all those things, but we're literally creating our own lives.
Yeah.
Every day of it. So if there's something that's going to bring an end to that, like what do I got to do between now and end of days?
Yeah.
To feel incredible, to feel whole, to feel human, to feel like it was a life well lived, puts that into some serious perspective. And the thing that puts that into perspective is death.
Yeah, it's the strongest medicine out. Like it's just like
death, the strongest medicine.
Yeah, it really is. Like you will get in touch with your priorities, your values. You want a mission statement for life? Face your mortality. You'll get your mission statement, right? I promise you.
Can I share a story?
Yeah, of course, please.
Tangent. So. One of the reasons that Creative Live exists and that I shifted my mission and vision from, I say but just focusing on being a successful independent artist with the working studio. And to be clear, I was absolutely living my best dream life of all time, making way more money than I could ever spend, or 10 times what I thought it was possible to make or my parents had made, traveling around, shooting, snowboarding, and skiing out of a helicopter with my friends.
Yeah,
that good.
Pretty dope, dude.
As badass as that is, I was caught in an avalanche in Alaska, and by every measure, I haven't talked a lot about this publicly. I have it on my list of shit to do, but I was caught in an avalanche that, by every measure, I should not have lived through. Mm-hmm. And I remember all of the things that you're talking about. If you've ever come up this close to it and escaped it, or near death or whatever, let's just say it crystallizes a lot of shit.
Yeah.
And it was literally in the 24 hours after that experience that I said, wait a minute, I've been running around beating my chest, doing all this stuff that I thought was sort of what I was put on this earth to do, but I realized that is the shortest, smallest version of myself that I want to be out in the world.
Yeah.
And so what is it that were you having fun prior to this? Absolutely. Is fun and joy and beauty and hard work and all those things important? Yes. How do we scale our ability to create the living and the life that we want? Because I tapped into that and it was amazing, but Creative Life exists literally because of my brush with death. Yeah. So I'm familiar with this of which you speak, and I believe it is the most powerful medicine. Yeah. I digress a little bit, but
That's not digression. That's exactly what the book is, right? What you did, like, I created a moment where people could share these stories with me, how death actually gave them more life, right? And so that we could start to understand it not as this thing to avoid, but like how to get the most out of the fact that we're mortal, right? So that we're comfortable with it, right?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about how uncomfortable I am right now.
Right, yeah.
And how I even qualifying it, like I haven't really told this story,
Yeah.
but I really need to tell it, and it's still in my backpack of shit to do.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that it keeps finding its way to the bottom of the backpack. Every time I reach in the backpack to tell a new story or to bring out a new chapter, it's funny how the death thing and my brush with it goes way down because I don't know, I don't have the words, I don't have the stories. Is it egotistical? Is it helpful? It's certainly painful, very emotional. Anyways, thanks for helping me recover that for a second there.
No, I mean, that's like, the permission is key.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, and the thing is, what you did was you were authentic, you were emotive, you were vulnerable. These are all the things that men actually need right now to get out of the shit that we're in, right? Like, men are having a really hard time, and they deserve it to be having a hard time.
Yeah.
But like, you know, what you just showed us was like, hey, this is what we want out of people, leaders, right? We want them to be able to reach down to the bottom of the bag and tell us the hard thing, right? And it just it happens with death. It's this mirror, right? And it took me saying, hey, you want a mission statement for life? Like, boom, and you're like, yeah, wait a second. A bell goes off in my head, and that's actually how I got my mission statement, was by almost dying, right?
Yeah.
And that's that's what I got to sit down with. There's 100 interviews, 100 people I've had dinner with, 100 people that I've really gotten into their bottom of the backpack story. And some of them are really, like, some of them are just beautiful stories, some of them are funny stories, and some of them are like, you know, I lost a child, or I was impacted by suicide. But what I want to do is bring the same level of compassion and openness and invitation to somebody who's lost a child or somebody who's been close to a suicide. Because with those, like, extreme deaths, we cover them with shame and self-shame, and no one wants to talk about it. No one wants to even check in with the person.
Yeah.
Right? And so we isolate a person who's already probably isolated because of their family structure, or, you know. And so for me, it's like, okay, so there's the part of this conversation that is self-knowledge. And the great thing about self-knowledge is that's how we heal ourselves, right? Like I don't care what any pill or what any membership to CrossFit or Pilates X will do for you. The thing that will do more for your well-being, for your longevity, for your vitality than anything else is self-knowledge, right? Like, you are your best healer.
Yeah.
Right?
It's built into our system.
Yeah. Michael Mead, who lives on the island here in Vashon, tells this great story. He brought this acupuncture master out to give a class to a group of people that were not acupuncture professionals. And they figured that this man would stand up and put some pins in do a diagnostic and put some pins and save their lives, right? And so he said, he gave them all pins. And they were like, why do I have these acupuncture needles? And he was like, you stick you. He's a Chinese man. Didn't speak very good English. And everyone, including Michael Mead, who had brought him there, was shocked. And he was like, no. And they're like, what are you talking about? You stick you. You put the pin in where you think you need it. And he was like, to himself, he was like, you do it. And everyone was terrified, right? But then they did it, and then he'd go by and be like, yeah, you stuck yourself there because you've got a thyroid problem. And that's actually, the meridian that is attracted to your thyroid. And so this information of, like, we actually are our best healers.
We know.
We know. And so if we want to, there's not a lot out there, really, when you look at it, that is a practice of self-knowledge, right? I don't have a lot of tools for it. We've got a lot of practices of self-improvement, right? Which is like, what you practice grows stronger, but if you don't know yourself, what are you actually growing? Like, okay. So I think that's the first thing that... Self-knowledge. And then the other important thing is human connection, which is another thing we don't have a lot of tools out there for human connection. Going to your therapist is not an exercise in human connection, right? and go to your therapist. It's a great way for self-knowledge if you want to go to a therapist.
Yeah.
I'm not against them. But human connection has been proven to be the #1 factor in longevity, right? Your community.
It's also what most people don't know is that a human child, if left alone, cannot survive. Not from lack of food or water,
No,
from
touch.
lack of touch. Remember what that's called? I'm spacing on it right now.
Yeah, I can't remember.
But we're social animals, and if you are wondering if this is a fact or not, human babies will die not from lack of food, not from lack of water, but from lack of connection, lack of human connection.
Yeah.
So
Those friendly doctors called the Nazis practiced it in real life
Yeah.
to learn that it's actually a phenomenon.
Yeah.
So
Sorry about that.
yeah,
Now back to
no,
you.
no, it's true. Human attachment. Our friend. I actually don't know if you spent time with Gabor Mate, but one of my mentors.
Listen to him a lot.
Yeah.
Ferris did an amazing interview with him.
Oh, right.
Yeah, Kate and I want to spend a little bit of time with him. I know you got to spend some time with him.
Oh, a lot of time. He's done more for me than anybody else as a teacher, for sure. But he breaks human vitality down to two things: attachment and authenticity. And the attachment piece cannot be. There's no way around it. And the authenticity piece, there's no way around it. We actually need to know what we want to be. Need to be able to speak it in order to live a vital life. But the attachment piece, the human connection piece, is talking about hard shit is the best way to get closest to the people in your lives, right? Conflict, your perceived conflict, turning your ship, your person, toward conflict in your life. I'm not saying you go and do this with all of the conflicts in your life tomorrow, unless
Right.
you feel like you have the skills.
Yeah.
But there is a conflict in your life called death if you're not talking about it. And it's a great testing ground to be like, let's talk about this hard thing, because you're going to get to know about yourself and the people you love faster than any other way. Like, I've had every death dinner I've ever had, including one I did with you and Kate.
Yep.
We've had spouses, married couples at the table. Every single time you will hear, honey, you've never heard this story before, or I've never heard that story, right?
Which is crazy.
Yeah.
Kate and I have been together for 20 years.
Yeah, exactly. Every single time.
Yeah.
And, you see that this, and it's not like the person gets mad.
No.
They get, they soften, and they're like, I love you in a new way,
Yeah.
right? Like, I waited 5 years to have my mom and my brother at a death dinner, because I was terrified, right? Big death guy.
Yeah.
Talk about death.
You're like, I got this thing out there I got to do.
I did.
Very deep in your backpack.
Yeah, no, I didn't want to do it, and I did, and I tell you, that, my love and respect for my brother and my mother, doubled in that evening, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's, you can take that to the bank, right?
Yeah.
That just feels good,
Yep.
right? Those are endorphins that heal, it's
very therapeutic. And
yeah.
so, extraordinary canvas.
Yeah, we've got a lot of, I apologize
No.
to all of the spaces
Do
we've got.
not apologize. It's an extraordinary canvas. And again, this sort of what are you doing now? What are you doing to, those two things? Again, attachment, what are the blocks that are keeping you from doing the thing, or what are you attached to and what are you holding on to that you should let go, and what are you not grabbing onto that you should? And the connecting part.
Yeah.
I think that we all, when we're looking inside, for example, that's where the creative force in all of us comes. The things that made you weird as a kid are going to make you fantastic as an artist or as an adult if you can connect with those things.
Yeah.
So you've set the table for us, metaphorically. We're here all week. I'd like to open the book and read a couple of prompts, because
Yeah.
in many ways, this is like a handbook. The subtitle is An Invitation and Guide to Life's Most Important Conversation. And why I think that is true is because you can travel 1,000,000 miles with this conversation, right?
Yeah, you can.
You're talking about one thing, but you're really talking about so many important things. And I think some of the prompts, why I think this is a book that people need to go out and drop the money for right away. Because just listen to some of these prompts. I think they're amazing. And maybe you can comment on a couple of them.
Yeah, and let me set up the prompts for you slightly.
Please do. Yeah, please do.
One thing is, Death Over Dinner is a singular project about connecting over dinner, right? This book is about having this conversation over beers, a walk in the park, drive through Yosemite, wherever you happen to be, on a phone, etc. And I didn't want to make it like the idiot's guide to talking about death or how to, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. But we wanted to make it like incredibly useful, where you could pick it up and
tactical.
Yeah, I guess more like tactical.
And I realize that we're flying at a 30,000 foot level, but I think it's important. And when we write the show notes for this thing, it's like this is a tactical guide for having the most important sort of conversations with yourself and your loved ones, not just about death, but about what do you want for yourself in this life. How do we create, close the gap between where you are and where you want to be?
Yep.
Chances are it's closer than you think it is if you sort of can live by some of these.
Yeah, these are meditations.
Yeah.
These are walking meditations. These are community meditations. And so each chapter is actually a conversation prompt that you can drop, propose, put into a conversation, like a game piece.
Yeah.
Right.
And it is very effective.
Yeah,
I've been watching you do this for 10 years. Yeah. Just let me set this out here. I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to set this metaphorically in the middle of the conversation and see what happens. And it just, people ask, like, I know people that think of themselves as question askers, like, this is next level shit. What you've done here. Well, before I start reading them, because I was gonna read ad hoc, but do you have some favorites?
No, I prefer the ad hoc. Like, let's see what happens. The I Ching, throw it.
Okay. If you had 30 days left to live, how would you spend it? What would your last day be like and your last hour?
Yeah, it's not a light one.
No.
Yeah.
How do you talk to your kids about death? Mm-hmm. I'm not a parent.
Well, you're a parent to many.
I am a parent to many. I'm the funkle.
Yeah.
The fun uncle.
Yeah, he's great. Yeah, my daughters love him.
I'm the fun uncle. So I end up being, dad by extension. But I observe, though, it does provide a lot of a vehicle into which to see a lot of my friends as parents try and do this. And I've watched this happen. Like, you come across a dead bird, or a bird hits the window, you go outside. It's like, what is or a family pet passes. Like, how do those conversations? I've witnessed those, and I'm like, that is exactly why I didn't have kids. Because, oh my God, it explodes my brain to think about how many elements of difficulty there are in that. So I think that's a very powerful one.
That's one of my favorite chapters too.
What is the most significant end-of-life experience of which you've been a part? I think we've all, most often for worse, sometimes for better, but most often for worse, been a part of some or close to some sort of traumatic end-of-life experience where we know someone whose life has been cut short. Sometimes it's very close, sometimes it's not so close, but I think that's heavy topic.
Well, and also sometimes it's just beautiful.
Yeah.
Right, because you get people who talk about experiences where you're like, wow, now that was a good death. Like, that brought the family, that person died in their integrity, they identify, and it's pretty extraordinary to hear the positive stories from that.
What would you eat for your last meal?
Yeah. Yeah. So
yeah.
There's
that's the
garden
unlock.
variety.
For sure, garden variety. What would you eat for your last meal? I think that's, some people are going to go to peanut butter and jelly with this crust cut off. I think it's telling. I think there's a lot of stories. I've had the good fortune of, alongside you or with your guidance, participating in this discussion.
Yeah. Well, and you want to give some easy. You don't want to necessarily have to dive into the deep end immediately. Some of these are kind of, they're not cliche, but they're accessible questions.
For sure.
What song would you have sung at your funeral? It can almost feel like a fun, like, datey, question you might put on, like, 36 Questions to Fall in Love or a date kind of situation. And you want some of those. Like, you want it for different, but you have no idea. If you haven't asked your parents or your loved one or a best friend what their last meal would be, Like you're gonna learn something fascinating, and you're gonna learn a story. You're not just gonna learn like PB&J.
Right.
You're gonna learn why.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Because my grandma used to make it for me, and
Yeah.
then tell me about your grandma, and then it's a beautiful thread to pull.
Yeah. Well, I mean, how often are we with people that we love in our lives when we're like, you feel stuck, right? Like, date night. Oh, I've had a busy week. I don't want to just talk about the cool shit that happened at work this week. Like, but how do I connect with my wife or the woman I'm dating, or I'm out with my mom or my brother, et cetera, and I don't know what, it's like,
Yeah.
sometimes like we just need questions that will, really have us show ourselves to each other. We want to be witnessed and we want to be seen.
Yep.
Right? And so I think that's, death's just one way. And it's like, there's, this book is not for everybody.
For sure, it's not for
But that's
everyone.
the other thing.
But I'm also at the same time, I'm trying to, like, I know what these conversations have done for me, and so I'm actually looking right in the camera. If you're listening, I can't look at you right now, but I'm looking right into the camera, and it actually is a book for everybody. Like, that's the punchline to me is, and to me that's part of what's beautiful about the topic, because the topic is sure they're conversations about death, but really that's the signal for what is it that you're doing now, what do you value, and what really gets that crisp.
Yeah.
What gets that crisp is like, okay, let's, and there are those superficial experiences, but what I find is that's like the gateway, right?
Yeah,
Once you
sure.
have one of those, it's like, okay, cool, let's, when was the last time, if you've been with your partner, spouse, whatever, for a long time, that you really found out something new about them? And what a joy. Ideally, it's joyful when you find out
Sure.
something new. Maybe not, but I think that's what this
that's
conversation,
intimacy. Into me, I see, or whatever. Esther Perel does this great thing. Into me, you see, or something. Into you, I see. But that, that's us. That's intrigue. That's eroticism. That's sexy. That's foreplay. Like it's all of those things.
Yeah.
And it's also that's where you create the future, a more aligned future with each other. Whether this is your business partner or your people that you go to work with, this changes work relationships, right? Like I've had people at work do death over dinner, or now we have old doctors and nurses edition, right? So doctors and nurses will be doing these death dinners, which is phenomenal, right? But yeah.
So I'm definitely prescribing this book.
I love it, Dr. Chase.
That's right. Fortunately, I dodged medical school, but so talk to me about, like, obviously this is one project. You're working on a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
I think it's important. I think this will be right on the cusp of this. I know you can pre-order it now. I know that. We've been friends for a long time. This is your focus, your current project, and it's admirable. But you've taken so much of your past into it. It's beautiful. But I also know you've got all kinds of other stuff cooking at all time. Cooking, the metaphor of cooking is not lost on me. In fact, I got to have you over. It's time to have dinner again, you and me. But sort of put a bow on this for me if you can. Just like, how are you thinking about this project? What's part of your next project, and how should we think about Michael Hebb? Put a bow on it for me.
Okay, I'll try.
Yeah, it's a big one. I know, but I'm.
I'm not the 5-year, 10-year, 15-year plan guy. But I'll tell you what's going on and what I'm excited about. The book's huge. A book represents this incredible opportunity to concentrate like all of your ideas or many of your ideas in one place and then have it be shareable.
Yeah.
Like I've never had, like most of my work's this ephemeral work, right?
Yeah.
Were you there? Or dinner.
Yeah.
Were you there, or can I talk about the experiences somebody else had?
Which is also by secondary, right? It's almost like because it's once removed. Like,
Yeah.
I'm telling you a story about a thing.
About a thing that happened and is gone as ether. And so this is, like I'd prefer to like buy the first 100,000 copies and just give them to people, right? My publisher and my bank were like, no, it's not going to happen. But the way that, it's an opportunity to get the work about death out there to a larger group of people for sure with the book. But Death Over Dinner itself, we're launching in India, which is huge, with incredible support. And I should back up and say, all of my projects now get to exist in this collective called Round Glass.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so I joined Round Glass. It was almost like the Bauhaus of wellness, right? It's a school, a collective, an organization that has brought together 250 well-being leaders in India and the U.S. and Europe to say, like, how do we build a movement around well-being? What would that look like? And so Death Over Dinner gets to exist not just as this, or Drugs Over Dinner, its sister or cousin, gets to exist in this, with pediatricians and cardiologists and people working on public health policy, and in Punjab and in Boston and and in Sweden, all over the place, right? So this idea of conversation as medicine,
Yeah.
right? And folk experience, not just it doesn't need a facilitator, right? So Death Over Dinner is growing. India, we're launching in Brazil. We'll probably launch in Mexico. The book's being published in 12 different countries, being translated into Portuguese, and we're talking to a few other translations. We're going to expand Drugs Over Dinner, which is about addiction, and we're working on a project with the Women's March founders about really important conversations. I just launched Women Teach Men, which is a project that looks at the very difficult problem of misogyny and inequity across gender gap, and says, okay, we're here, how do we get to a better future? Working with men, not just blaming men, which is, what is happening has to happen.
We've earned it.
But what would a next step look like? How do we actually learn what we need to learn as men in order to re-enter the gender conversation, right? And so, with Esther Perel and Gina Rudin and Tracy McMillan, all these amazing women, we just did our first 100 men gathering in Ojai, and it was transformational, right? And so that's we're going to scale that, that'll scale like Death Over Dinner has. There's 25 other projects that, it's we'll go into them, I'm sure, next time.
Yeah. Well, what's the best place for folks to find you? Obviously, you just listed a bunch of very, at their core, very seductive topics. These are all conversations that we need to have. You're a master at facilitating them. Obviously, let's talk about Death Over Dinner book is the gateway, but if people are going to sort of tap into the mainframe as you, where should you send them? Of course, the book, number one, first and foremost, but anything else you want to?
Yeah, I think going to Round Glass, it's just round.glass, and then you'll see how these projects fit in with maternal health and and projects in villages in India, and improving water systems, and it's remarkable to see the tapestry come together. So that's where I've kind of committing all of my energy right now, and it's exciting to see it, in a collective.
Super psyched for you. I'm as much as I've loved this conversation, we got to plan dinner, so I'm going to have to let you all go. Thank you so much for sitting with us, and congratulations on the book. I know you're just getting started with the press. Thanks for doing us first.
Of course.
And much success, bud.
All right, buddy.
All right.
Till next time.
Till next time. He knows the line. We'll see it again. Hopefully, probably, maybe.